There's a moment in every sport where you stop watching what happens on the track and start watching what happens behind the curtain. For NASCAR fans, that moment didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly. A questionable penalty here, a contradictory statement there, an uncomfortable silence where transparency should have been. And then, over the span of roughly 18 months, the curtain didn't just slip. It was torn down entirely. The problem isn't any single controversy. The problem is that when you lay every controversy end to end, the timeline tells a story NASCAR never intended anyone to read. Let's start where most people start, with the lawsuit. In late 2023, Michael Jordan's 23XI Racing and Front Row Motorsports refused to sign NASCAR's new charter agreement. The sticking point was a provision that would have stripped them of the right to take legal action against the sanctioning body. Think about that for a second. The contract that was supposed to guarantee teams a future in the sport also demanded they surrender the ability to challenge the very system governing that future. 23XI and Front Row didn't sign. They filed an antitrust lawsuit instead, alleging that NASCAR operated as a monopoly, controlling revenue splits, dictating team economics, and locking owners into an arrangement where the house always wins. NASCAR pushed back hard. They revoked the team's charters, argued the agreement was fair, and positioned the lawsuit as an act of disloyalty. For much of 2025, that framing held. And then discovery began. Discovery is the phase of litigation where private communications become public. And what surfaced from NASCAR's executive offices didn't just embarrass the organization, it fundamentally reshaped the way fans understood the relationship between the sport's leadership and its own teams. Text messages between then-Commissioner Steve Phelps and Executive Brian Herbst revealed language that no one could wave away. Phelps referred to Hall of Fame team owner Richard Childress as a stupid redneck who needs to be taken out back and flogged. He told Herbst that if Childress didn't like the state of the sport, he should sell your charter and get out. There were messages showing alarm at Denny Hamlin's involvement with the SRX series, not because of competitive concerns, but because it felt like a challenge to NASCAR's dominance. The tone wasn't competitive, it was contemptuous. Fans read those texts and saw something they had long suspected but never had proof of, a leadership class that viewed team owners not as partners but as subordinates. The messages suggested a governing body more interested in control than collaboration. And suddenly, the antitrust lawsuit didn't look like a rich man's grudge match. It looked like the only lever teams had ever been given. But here's where the timeline starts to bend in a direction that made people uneasy. The trial reached day 9. Both sides had taken their shots. Michael Jordan himself testified about the financial realities facing team owners, about a revenue structure that kept teams dependent no matter how well they performed. Richard Childress took the stand and described what it felt like to see those text messages. Jim France, NASCAR's chairman, testified too. And then, almost out of nowhere, a settlement was announced. Permanent charters for all teams going forward. A bigger share of media revenue. The return of 6 charters to 23XI and Front Row. On paper, it looked like a victory for the teams. On paper, it looked like progress. But fans started asking questions. The settlement came fast, suspiciously fast, some said, given the severity of what had been exposed. Was NASCAR settling because justice demanded it, or because the trial was surfacing things far more damaging than anyone anticipated? The leaked texts about Childress were ugly, but insiders suggested there was more, communications that went deeper, that painted a broader picture of how NASCAR's inner circle truly operated. The settlement felt less like resolution and more like a containment strategy. Then came January. Steve Phelps resigned. NASCAR framed it as a personal decision, a man choosing to step away after 20 years. But the timing told its own story. The texts had gone public in November. Sponsors had reacted. Bass Pro Shops founder Johnny Morris, a major backer of both NASCAR and Richard Childress Racing, wrote a letter publicly calling for Phelps's removal, accusing him of lacking the fairness and objectivity the role demanded. By January 6th, Phelps was out. NASCAR announced no immediate plans to name a successor. The commissioner role would simply be absorbed by the existing executive leadership team. Fans noticed something strange in that decision too. A sport recovering from a credibility crisis chose not to bring in fresh leadership. It chose to consolidate power internally, distribute Phelps's responsibilities among the same people who had been in the room when those texts were sent. It was a move that, intentionally or not, communicated that the institution didn't believe it had a structural problem. It believed it had a public relations problem. And then, 2026 started. The Daytona 500 arrived with new qualifying rules, new format tweaks, new energy from the Netflix documentary push. NASCAR wanted a clean start. But 3 races into the season, Tyler Reddick, driving for 23XI Racing, the very team that had just sued NASCAR, won 3 consecutive Cup races. It was a remarkable achievement. It was also immediately suspicious to a fan base already primed to see patterns. Conspiracy theories exploded. Fans accused NASCAR of looking the other way on potential technical violations as a form of goodwill toward the team that had just forced a settlement. Shane Van Gisbergen publicly questioned whether something was off. The optics were impossible for NASCAR to manage because the optics were a direct product of the credibility they had already lost. NASCAR insiders pushed back on the cheating narrative. They pointed out that 23XI's cars passed inspection. That Reddick is simply one of the most talented drivers on the grid. That winning streaks happen, and they're probably right. But that's the thing about trust. Once it fractures, even legitimate outcomes get questioned. Every close call on the track, every penalty that seems lighter than precedent would suggest, every rule that changes at a convenient moment, and all gets filtered through the memory of those text messages, that rushed settlement, that quiet resignation. Because fans also remember what happened with Austin Cindric at COTA in 2025. They remember that he deliberately right-hooked Ty Dillon, an act nearly identical to what earned Bubba Wallace a 1-race suspension in 2022. Cindric got a $50,000 fine and 50 points. No suspension. Dale Earnhardt Jr. publicly questioned what the point of having rules even was if they bent depending on who broke them. The inconsistency wasn't subtle. It was the kind of thing that sticks in a fan base's memory and colors everything that follows. So when fans say the timeline doesn't add up, they're not pointing to one event. They're pointing to a sequence, a lawsuit that exposed private contempt, a settlement that arrived before the worst could surface, a resignation dressed up as a personal choice, a leadership vacuum filled by the same institution that created it, and a season that opened with the very team at the center of all of it winning in ways that felt almost too convenient. Each event, on its own, has a reasonable explanation, but placed together, they form a pattern that erodes something no rule change or format tweak can rebuild. Trust is the invisible architecture of any sport. You can't see it during a green flag run or a 4-tire pit stop. But the moment it crumbles, you feel it in everything. And right now, a growing number of NASCAR fans are feeling it, in the broadcasts, in the headlines, in the gap between what the sport says and what the sport does. The timeline doesn't add up. And the hardest part for NASCAR isn't that fans noticed. It's that fans were paying attention the whole time.